A rock sat in a riverbed for 10,000 years. It was heavy and reddish-brown. Nobody looked at it twice. It was just another stone. Herders stepped over it. Children skipped it across the water. No one knew what was hidden inside. Buried within that rock was something extraordinary, a material that would eventually hold up skyscrapers, span oceans with bridges, and arm the empires that shaped the modern world. But for most of human history, that rock was completely useless. The real question isn't how humans eventually discovered iron, it's how they discovered it at all. They had no chemistry, no thermometers, no knowledge of atoms. They only had fire, patience, and thousands of failed experiments. And somehow, they learned how to pull metal from stone. This is the story of that transformation, and it starts with one frustrating fact. Iron does not want to be found. For nearly 2 million years, human technology depended on stone. Flint could be shaped into incredibly sharp tools. It could cut meat and skin animals, but one hard strike against bone could destroy it. A broken stone tool was finished. There was no way to repair it. You needed another piece of stone. Then, around 5,000 years ago, something changed. People in the Middle East and the Balkans discovered strange rocks that behaved differently in fire. Heat them enough and they produced liquid metal. That metal could be hardened into almost any shape. This was copper. Copper changed everything. It could be hammered, it could be melted, it could be poured into molds, and when it became dull, it could be sharpened again. But copper had one major weakness. It was soft. A copper blade could bend when it hit something hard. Then came another discovery. Someone discovered that copper could be mixed with tin. Roughly 9 parts copper to 1 part tin produced something much stronger. Bronze. For the next 2,000 years, bronze became one of civilization's most important materials. Bronze swords appeared, bronze plows appeared, bronze tools spread across entire civilizations. But bronze had a serious weakness. Copper was common. Tin was rare. That meant bronze depended on long-distance trade. If those trade routes collapsed, bronze production suffered, and beneath the feet of those civilizations was another metal. Iron. Iron is one of the most abundant elements in Earth's crust. It exists in mountains, in riverbeds, and in red clay soils. Almost everywhere humans lived, iron ore was nearby, yet ancient people couldn't easily use it. The reason was chemistry. Iron bonds extremely strongly with oxygen. Over time, exposed iron becomes iron oxide, rust, and rust looks like ordinary rock. Gold can appear as shiny nuggets. Copper can sometimes appear in recognizable pieces. Iron is different. Usable metallic iron almost never appears naturally on the surface. Ancient people weren't looking at hidden metal, they were looking at rocks. There was one strange exception. Iron sometimes fell from the sky. Meteoric iron could be worked directly, but it was extremely rare. The real challenge was extracting iron from ordinary ore, and that was much harder than working with copper. Copper melts at about 1,085 degrees Celsius. Bronze melts at even lower temperatures. Ancient furnaces could reach those temperatures. Pure iron melts at about 1,538 degrees Celsius. That difference was enormous. Early metalworkers tried heating iron-rich rocks, but nothing happened. The rock glowed. It stayed solid. The problem seemed impossible. The solution was not to melt the iron, it was to remove the oxygen, and that required a completely different kind of furnace. The breakthrough came slowly. First came charcoal. Wood was heated with very little oxygen. The result was carbon-rich charcoal. It burned hotter than ordinary timber. Then, furnaces became taller and more enclosed. Their shape created a natural chimney effect. More air entered from below. Temperatures climbed. Then came the bellows. Leather bags forced air directly into the hottest part of the furnace. With enough air, temperatures could rise above 1,200 degrees Celsius. Still not hot enough to melt iron, but melting wasn't necessary. Inside the furnace, charcoal produced carbon monoxide. That gas was extremely effective at removing oxygen from iron oxide. The rock didn't melt. Instead, the iron was chemically separated from the oxygen. What came out wasn't liquid iron, it was a glowing, spongy mass of iron and slag. A bloom. For the first person who discovered one, it must have looked almost impossible. Rock had gone into the furnace, metal had come out, but the bloom wasn't ready to become a sword. It was weak and porous, it was filled with impurities, so the blacksmith had to keep working. While the bloom was still extremely hot, it was placed on an anvil. Then it was hammered again and again. Each blow pushed slag out, air pockets collapsed, the iron particles fused together. Hours of work transformed the bloom into wrought iron. It was tough, it could bend without immediately breaking, and it didn't require imported tin. But wrought iron still had one problem. It wasn't always hard enough to replace bronze. Then, blacksmiths noticed something strange. Iron that stayed longer in hot charcoal became harder. It held an edge far better than ordinary iron. Something was happening inside the metal. Carbon from the charcoal was entering the iron. With enough carbon, the material became steel, and suddenly, iron could become extremely hard. Heat it, work it, then cool it quickly. The result could hold an edge far better than ordinary iron. The blacksmiths didn't understand atoms, they didn't understand crystal structures, they didn't understand carbon, but they understood the process. They knew how hot the metal needed to be, they knew how long to heat it, and they knew how quickly to cool it. That knowledge passed from master to apprentice, generation after generation. For centuries, iron remained a secondary technology. Bronze already had the infrastructure. Bronze had the skilled workers. Bronze had the prestige. Then, around 1200 BCE, the Bronze Age world began to collapse. The Mycenaean palaces fell silent. The Hittite Empire disintegrated. Cities across the eastern Mediterranean burned. The exact causes are still debated. Climate stress may have played a role, invasions may have played a role, trade failures may have contributed too. But one consequence was clear. The long-distance tin trade began to break down. Bronze became harder to produce, and metal workers had another option. Iron ore was everywhere. The bloomery process already existed. Necessity accelerated the technology. Civilizations that depended on bronze began turning toward iron. And iron had another major advantage. It was local. A community could find iron ore nearby. Charcoal could be produced from local forests. A blacksmith no longer needed the same distant supply network. That changed who could own metal tools. Iron tools spread into ordinary farming communities. Axes became more available. Plows became more available. Weapons could be produced on a much larger scale. And the world began changing around the metal. Forests could be cleared more efficiently, farming expanded, armies could equip more soldiers. Iron was no longer just another material, it was becoming the foundation of a new technological age. And the story didn't stop there. Different civilizations pushed ironworking in different directions. Chinese furnaces eventually became hot enough to produce cast iron. Indian smiths developed crucible techniques for producing high-carbon steel. African metalworkers developed sophisticated furnace designs. Each culture found its own way to control the same basic chemistry. Look at a modern city skyline today. Steel beams hold up enormous buildings. Bridges stretch across rivers and oceans. Cars, ships, machines, and countless tools depend on steel. Modern technology operates on a completely different scale. Factories replaced small workshops, machines replaced hand-operated bellows, modern furnaces replaced charcoal shafts. But the fundamental chemistry hasn't changed. Oxygen is stripped away from iron oxide, metal remains. The scale changed by millions, the chemistry did not. And that brings us back to the rock in the river. For thousands of years it looked like nothing, just another stone, another piece of earth. But inside it was a material that would transform human civilization. The people who first discovered that transformation didn't know they were changing the world. They didn't know about chemistry. They didn't know about atoms. They didn't know where their discovery would eventually lead. They simply opened a furnace. They looked inside, and instead of finding another useless rock, they found metal, something dense, something strong, something they could shape, sharpen, harden, and pass to the next generation. That moment was small, but its consequences were enormous. Because once humanity learned how to turn ordinary rock into iron, the world would never be made the same way again.